Imagine the most powerful human being on the planet. He's young, brilliant, and commands an army that has crushed every empire in its path. He is Alexander the Great, the conqueror of the known world. One day, while visiting the Greek city of Corinth, Alexander decides to meet a local celebrity. But this celebrity isn't a politician, a wealthy merchant, or a high priest. He is a homeless man, living inside a giant clay wine jar on the street. He wears nothing but a filthy rag, eats raw octopus, sleeps with stray dogs, and regularly masturbates and defecates in public. He is Diogenes of Sinope. Alexander, surrounded by his heavily armed, glittering royal guard, stands over the half-naked beggar basking in the dirt. Seeking to show his immense power and generosity, the conqueror of the world looks down and says, "I am Alexander the Great. Ask of me any favor you wish, and it shall be granted." The homeless man slowly opens one eye, looks at the most dangerous man on earth, and replies with absolute terrifying indifference. "Yes, stand a little out of my sun." The royal guards freeze, expecting the beggar's head to be chopped off instantly. Instead, Alexander laughs. As he walks away, he whispers to his generals, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." We read this story today as a cute philosophical anecdote about asceticism. But on Deconstructing Minds, we don't do cute anecdotes. We perform psychological autopsies. We have to ask, what kind of mind is capable of doing this? Was Diogenes a truly enlightened sage? Or was he a deeply traumatized outcast, exhibiting severe antisocial personality traits? Today, we are deconstructing the Father of Cynicism. We are moving past the myth of the wise beggar to uncover a man who suffered the ultimate trauma of ancient times, social death and exile, and responded by weaponizing his own shamelessness. We will explore how a convicted counterfeiter transformed his humiliation into a psychological fortress so impenetrable that even the emperor of the world couldn't break it. Brace yourselves to meet the man who proved that if you have nothing to lose, no one can ever control you. To understand the radical, aggressive madness of Diogenes, we have to look at the life he lost. Diogenes was not born a beggar. He was born around 412 BC in the wealthy, bustling port city of Sinope on the edge of the Black Sea. He was a child of privilege. His father, Hesiasius, was the most powerful financial figure in the city, the master of the mint, the man in charge of the city's money. Young Diogenes was destined to inherit a life of luxury, respect, and political power. But then, a catastrophic scandal destroyed his life. His father was caught in a massive criminal conspiracy, defacing the currency. They were adulterating the silver coins, essentially destroying the economic foundation of their own city. The authorities struck back with brutal force. Hesiasius was thrown into prison, where he likely died, and Diogenes was stripped of his citizenship, all his wealth, and formally exiled. In the ancient Greek world, exile was not just a relocation, it was a psychological and social death penalty. A citizen without a city was nothing. He had no rights, no protection, and no identity. Diogenes was suddenly a wealthy, arrogant aristocrat thrown into the dirt, forced to wander the ancient world as a stateless, despised criminal. This is the primal trauma. A normal human being would respond to this sudden plunge into poverty with crushing depression, begging, or a desperate attempt to regain their lost status. But Diogenes' psyche performed one of the most brilliant and extreme defensive maneuvers in human history: radical hypercompensation. According to legend, before leaving, Diogenes visited the oracle of Delphi to ask for guidance. The oracle gave him a cryptic command: deface the currency. But Diogenes didn't interpret this literally. He interpreted it psychologically and culturally. He realized that the currency wasn't just silver coins, it was the entire system of human values. Money, status, reputation, manners, fashion. These were all just fake coins that society had agreed to value. Diogenes decided that if society had rejected him, he would reject society with twice the ferocity. This is a massive psychological pivot. Instead of feeling ashamed of his poverty, he weaponized it. He declared that civilization itself was a disease. The people walking around in their expensive togas, obsessed with politics and reputation, were the true madmen. He, the homeless exile, was the only sane man left. He didn't just accept his fall from grace, he leaned into it. He became the dog, in Greek, kion, which gave birth to the word cynic. He decided to live exactly like an animal in the street, without shame, without property, without hypocrisy. By completely destroying his own social identity, he achieved a terrifying form of absolute autonomy. You cannot cancel a man who has already cancelled himself. You cannot steal from a man who owns nothing. And you cannot humiliate a man who masturbates in the town square. Diogenes turned his trauma into an indestructible armor of shamelessness. If you walked into the bustling agora, the central marketplace of ancient Athens, you would see merchants, politicians, and philosophers engaged in the high-minded business of civilization. And right in the middle of this refined society, you would see Diogenes. He lived in a pithos, a massive clay wine jar. He urinated on people who insulted him. He defecated in the theatre. And, most shockingly, he regularly masturbated in broad daylight in the centre of the crowded market. When the horrified Athenians yelled at him, demanding to know how he could do something so obscene in public, Diogenes simply rubbed his stomach and replied, with a chillingly logical sigh, "If only it were as easy to banish hunger by rubbing my belly." Historians often frame this as eccentric philosophy. But on Deconstructing Minds, we have to look at the psychological mechanics of disgust. What Diogenes was doing was performative transgression. He wasn't crazy. He was conducting a relentless daily psychological experiment on the people of Athens. Think about the emotion of shame. Shame is the invisible chain that society uses to control you. You buy expensive clothes, you speak politely, and you hide your natural bodily functions because you are terrified of being judged. Diogenes realized that if he could completely eradicate his own capacity for shame, he would achieve total psychological invulnerability. He observed the stray dogs of Athens. Dogs eat when they are hungry, sleep when they are tired, and mate when they are aroused. They do not care about the opinions of other dogs. They have no ego to protect. Diogenes didn't just admire the dogs, he psychologically mutated himself to become one. This is desensitization through extreme exposure. By constantly performing the most taboo acts possible, the fear of judgment simply burned out of his nervous system. Then there is the famous story of the lantern. Diogenes was seen walking through the sunlit streets of Athens in broad daylight, holding a lit lantern up to people's faces. When asked what on earth he was doing, he replied, "I am looking for a human being." This wasn't a cute metaphor. It was a brutal insult. He was telling the politicians and the wealthy elites that beneath their expensive tunics they were fake. They were cowards, slaves to their desires, and actors playing a role. The lantern was a psychological weapon. It was his way of saying, "You look at me in the dirt and feel pity. I look at you in your palaces and feel nothing but contempt." Every great psychological deconstruction requires a nemesis. For Diogenes, that nemesis was the most famous, respected, and brilliant philosopher of the ancient world, Plato. Plato was everything Diogenes was not. Plato was a wealthy aristocrat who wore pristine white robes, taught at an elite academy, and believed that the physical world was dirty and imperfect. Plato built beautiful, sterile utopias in his mind to escape the messy reality of human nature. Diogenes, on the other hand, rolled in the mud to prove that human nature is messy. Their rivalry was the ultimate clash of psychological coping mechanisms. The most legendary encounter happened when Plato was holding a lecture at his academy. Plato had just given a highly celebrated definition of a human being. He defined a human as a featherless biped, an animal with 2 legs and no feathers. The intellectual elite of Athens applauded his brilliance. Hearing this, Diogenes captured a chicken. He violently plucked every single feather off its body, marched straight into the sacred halls of Plato's academy, threw the bleeding, naked bird onto the floor, and shouted, "Behold! I have brought you Plato's human being!" It is a hilarious story, but psychologically it is an act of intellectual assassination. Diogenes was attacking Plato's massive ego. Plato tried to categorize life into neat, logical boxes. Diogenes brought a naked, shivering chicken to prove that life defies categorization. It was a visceral reminder of chaos. Plato was forced to amend his definition, adding "with broad, flat nails," but the damage was done. Plato was humiliated. He famously called Diogenes a Socrates gone mad. But the psychological warfare didn't stop there. One day, Diogenes visited Plato's luxurious home. His feet were covered in mud and filth. He intentionally walked all over Plato's expensive, beautiful carpets, stomping the dirt deep into the fabric, and declared, "I trample upon the pride of Plato." Plato, however, delivered a psychological counterpunch that cuts to the very core of our deconstruction. He looked at Diogenes and calmly replied, "Yes, Diogenes, with another kind of pride." This is the brilliant catch. Plato saw right through the performance. Diogenes claimed to have no ego, to be free of all vanity. But Plato recognized that Diogenes' extreme poverty and shocking behavior had become its own form of narcissistic mirroring. Diogenes was just as obsessed with his image as the elites he mocked. His image just happened to be that of a beggar. He was addicted to the shock, the attention, and the feeling of moral superiority. He didn't escape the prison of the ego, he just painted his cell a different color. If you want to test the absolute limits of a man's psychological armor, you strip away his freedom. For most philosophers, their theories sound brilliant in a comfortable classroom, but collapse the moment real danger arrives. But Diogenes was not most philosophers. In his old age, while on a voyage to Aegina, Diogenes' ship was hijacked by ruthless Mediterranean pirates. In the ancient world, being captured by pirates meant one of 2 things: a gruesome death or being sold into brutal, lifelong slavery. It was the ultimate nightmare. A normal human being would descend into sheer panic, weeping, begging for mercy, or praying to the gods. Diogenes' response? He treated the entire ordeal like a minor inconvenience. He was transported to the slave market in Crete, put on a block in chains, and stripped half naked to be inspected by wealthy buyers. The auctioneer, looking at this filthy, arrogant old man, mockingly asked him, "What trade do you know? What are you good for?" Diogenes looked out at the crowd of rich, slave-owning aristocrats, pointed his finger, and shouted with terrifying authority, "I know how to govern men. Sell me to someone who needs a master." This is not just a witty comeback. On Deconstructing Minds, we recognize this as the ultimate example of frame control and cognitive reframing. Power, Diogenes realized, is not a legal document. It is a psychological state. The auctioneer and the buyers believed they held the power because they had the gold and the chains. Diogenes shattered their reality by refusing to accept their narrative. He maintained an internal locus of control so absolute that the chains around his wrists felt like mere jewelry. A wealthy Corinthian named Xeniades was so intrigued by this bizarre display of dominance that he bought Diogenes. On the walk to his new estate, Diogenes turned to his new owner and immediately began giving him orders. When Xeniades protested, reminding Diogenes that he was a slave, Diogenes delivered a psychological kill shot. If you hired a physician or a ship's pilot, would you tell them what to do, or would you obey them? I am the physician of your soul. Obey me. And the most shocking part of this story? Xeniades actually obeyed him. Diogenes became the tutor to Xeniades' children and the de facto ruler of the household. Xeniades eventually told his friends, "A good genius has entered my house." Diogenes lived the rest of his life in Corinth, technically a slave, but functionally a king. He proved that if your mind is completely impenetrable, society cannot enslave you. You can take a man's property, you can take his legal rights, but you cannot conquer a mind that has already conquered itself. Legend has it that Diogenes of Sinope died on the exact same day in 323 BC as Alexander the Great. The contrast between their deaths is the final perfect punchline to his life. Alexander the Great died in a golden palace in Babylon, likely of a fever or poison, sweating, paranoid, and grasping desperately to hold on to an empire that was already fracturing. Diogenes died in the dirt of Corinth. Some legends say he died of old age. Others say he simply held his breath until he expired. The ultimate, final act of asserting total control over his own existence. Alexander died a slave to his ambition. Diogenes died the freest man on earth. When we deconstruct Diogenes today, we aren't just looking at a crazy, homeless man from ancient Greece. We are looking at a mirror. Why do we still tell his stories 2,000 years later? Because deep down, in the darkest, most exhausted corners of our modern minds, we all secretly want to be Diogenes. We live in an era of crippling social anxiety. We are obsessed with our credit scores, our social media likes, our job titles, and the opinions of people we don't even like. We are suffocating under the weight of civilization. Diogenes represents a profound, taboo psychological fantasy, the urge to just drop out. The urge to set our social masks on fire, walk away from the rat race, climb into a barrel, and tell the emperor of the world to get out of our sunlight. But our autopsy also reveals the price of absolute freedom. To become Diogenes, you have to amputate your need for human connection. You have to kill your capacity for shame, but in doing so, you kill the very thing that binds us together as a society. Diogenes achieved invulnerability because he had nothing left to lose. He was the ultimate troll, the original punk, and a brilliant, traumatized exile who weaponized his own ruin. He didn't write massive, complicated books like Plato or Aristotle. His entire life was the book. He leaves us with a terrifying question that haunts the modern world. Are we the sane ones for building palaces of stress and anxiety? Or was the madman in the barrel the only one who figured out how to actually live?